If you didn't know, there's an even easier way for us to work with data flow in SwiftUI, and trust me, it's smoother than Craig's hair. And Craig, bro, seriously, we're all waiting. When are you going to drop the hair routine on YouTube? Well, we're actually going to take a look into the new observation framework in iOS 17 in this free observation course here on my channel. And feel free to check out the rest of this course and the source code down below with the links provided. We'll build an app that allows us to manage data and our user state, which could be either logged in or logged out within this store that we're going to be building. By the end of this video, you should be able to see how this new framework gives us a massive performance boost in our apps. All right, cool. So you can see here that we've actually got our project, and all I've got here is some screens that I've created, and we're actually going to build on top of this. Now, if you want to access the source code to get these starter files or the completed files, it's in the link down below where you can access it from Gumroad. But so far we just got this little bookstore, and in the store we can like see reviews. We can also add a review if we want to. We'll also be able to like and favorite reviews as well, and also log in. Right now, this actually isn't hooked up to anything, but there's quite a few features we're going to add to this app using the observation framework. Now, if you're used to working with the observable object protocol, you might be used to writing code that looks like this in terms of creating a source of truth. Now, when you're working with observation framework, it's actually a lot simpler to create a source of truth by using the observable macro. So let's actually see how we can use this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file called content model, and this is going to be our source of truth for this bookstore. So let's create a new Swift file, and then within this file, the first thing we're going to need to do is actually import the observation framework. So we'll just say import observation like so, and then I'm just going to create the skeleton for this source of truth. So class content model like so. Cool. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're working with the observable macro, which we'll add in a second, is that your model needs to be a class and not a struct, because it needs to be a reference type so it can actually track the changes in memory. Now, all we need to do to mark this as a source of truth using the observation framework is simply add this macro. So just say at observable, and that's it. It's like seriously, but that's it. So the next thing we want to do is actually add in our model so our view can actually listen to changes that happen within this source of truth. Now, I've already got a model for this that I've created, so I'm going to type this out and then we'll discuss it. And you can see here that I've just basically added a property called data, which is an array of content, which is using some dummy data from our model here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that I didn't actually have to use the app published, property wrapper here, and that's because with observable you don't need to use that anymore. And if you watch my next video, which actually goes into migrating to the observable framework, I go into more detail about this. If we want to use this, you would be used to using either a state object or an observed object in your actual view, and it's actually changed now. Instead, all you need to use is just a state property wrapper. That's it. So you don't need to worry about when to use state object or observed object anymore. So back in our content view, what we're going to do is actually create an instance of this. So just below, well, actually just above here, all we need to do now is just say state, and then we'll say private var content model, and we'll just create an instance of it like so. And now our view has a source of truth that it can listen to. Now, it's not actually using this property just yet. So wherever we have our dummy data directly, like in our for eaches here, we'll want to update that to now use this property that we've created an instance of. So let's just replace that. And then we'll also just replace this here as well to use the property that is listening to. Okay, cool. So you can see now that we've replaced that and our app still looks fine. So it looks like it's still reading the data from our dummy data within our source of truth. One of the main benefits we get with this new observation framework is the performance improvements that come with it. Now, one of the main performance improvements we get is that when your views is listening directly to a property, that's the only time it will refresh. Now, in order to see this in action, what I'm actually going to do is create a new function in our content model to help us increase and decrease the likes of each one of these books that's on our store. So in our model for our ratings, we're actually going to add two new functions to help us like and dislike. So let's go into our model for our content. And if I scroll down here, I should see this struct here called rating. And I'm just going to add these two new mutating functions now. And you can see here, nothing too crazy here. All it is just two functions to either increase the like or the dislike. In our source of truth, we're going to want to use these functions to actually help manipulate the data so we can actually see those changes reflected on our UI. So if we go into our content model, in here, we're going to add two new functions to actually help us, call the like and dislike. So you can see with these two functions, all we're doing is passing in the content, and then we're going to find the model within our array, and then simply on the actual model item within our array, we'll either call like if you call it on like, or increase the dislikes if you call it on dislikes. So we just simply need to call these two functions in our view for it to update. So if we go back into our content view, you should see that we actually have a content card, and within this content card right now, you'll see that we have this closure. It didn't actually tell us which action was performed, if it was like a like or a dislike. So what I'm just going to do very quickly is add in a enum and update this closure to tell us what action was specifically performed. So I'll do that now. And as you can see, we just got this enum here called action type that has some cases. So like, dislike, and review, so we can know what action was specifically performed. And as well, if I keep going down, we just got the closure to pass this through. And if I keep on going down to our function, our button actions, where we call our action, we call our dislike, and if someone taps on reviews, we call our reviews. Now I'm going to get a build error here because I've not actually used this closure within the actual content view. So that's what this is saying. So I just go back to our actual content view. It's saying that we need to specify, the argument list. So I'm just going to say here action in. And then within this action here, I'm just simply going to change this a bit to either call our like, dislike, or show reviews toggle. So I'll add that in now. All right, cool. So as you can see here, we've now got our closure passing through our data, and we've got our like, dislike, and reviews, and we're just calling our content model functions that we set up before within our model. Now, if you want to learn more about, passing actions between views and whatnot, I do actually cover this within my course here that discusses how to tackle a take-home project in SwiftUI all for free on my channel. So you should check out this playlist here for sure. So let's actually just test this out. So let's say, for example, if I increase this, so you can see here that as I'm tapping it, the dislikes is going up, and the same here with the likes, and I can go to different models and it's, changing. And also this is also being maintained within our model. Now, another thing you'll realize is that our for each is actually refreshing every single time. And the reason why is because the model is changing, and both of these for eaches are actually listening to that property. Now I'll actually show you how we get a performance boost in the observation framework, because there are some times where you're not using a property and the view doesn't refresh at all. So we'll tackle that later on in this video, so make sure you stick around. And if you're enjoying this video so far, honestly, you don't want to miss what's coming up, because we're going to be going over binding, also going to be looking at bindable, computer properties, and those performance improvements that I mentioned before. And if you're enjoying this video so far, leave a comment down below. I'm actually, curious to know what your thoughts are, as well as, sharing the video, like, subscribe, and hit notification bell. And like I mentioned before, if you want to access this source code, the links are down below, so you can access it down below as well. So if you actually look at our UI here, you'll see that I've got this placeholder here called num here favorites. And the whole point of this is to show the number of items that are being favorited within our model. So what would be a good purpose for this here? It would be to use a computer property. And what I want to show you now is how computer properties work within the observation framework, because similar to actual, properties themselves, whenever a computer property changes, it also refreshes your UI as well. So what we can do is observe changes to our model within a computer property and force a refresh. So back in our content model, I'm going to create a new computer property here called favorites count. So you can see here that all this computer property does is just have a filter using a key path to check for the items that have been favorited and give us back a number. Now, we also need a function to actually help us toggle whether an item has been favorited or not. So let's add that in too. So similar to what we're doing before, we're just basically getting the item and accessing it at the index, and then calling the toggle function on that model item. So we want to actually call this function within our content view. And what I actually have is some swipe actions set up. And if you want to learn more about swipe actions, I've got a video on my channel. You should actually see it somewhere here. But if I swipe across here, you'll see that we actually have a, swipe action to unfavorite favorite items and to favorite items that haven't been favorited yet. So in our swipe action, we'll want to call that function to toggle favorite. So let's do that now. So in this button, I'm simply just going to say content model. So you can see here in our swipe actions, we just call our functions to toggle our favorites. And then rather than us actually having this placeholder here for the number of favorites, I'm going to replace this. And then we're simply just going to use our computer property so I can show you how that causes a redraw as well. So let's just say content model dot favorite count, like so. Cool, in our string. So let's just test this out and see what happens. And I just realized I'm missing a parentheses here, so let's add in that parentheses. Cool. So let's say I favorite this. You'll now see that our view updates and we can now see that in our list. And if I remove this, you'll see that it unfavorites it. And likewise, if I remove this, you'll see that we actually have 0 favorites at all. So it's exactly what we want. Property wrapper as well that we can use called bindable. Now you might be wondering, is this the exact same as binding? And the quick answer to that is no. So what's the difference between the two? And I actually do cover in a lot more detail the difference between binding and bindable within this course on my channel, and you should see it in the playlist on the in this course as well. But the best way to think about it is that you actually want to use bindable specifically for any kind of model that is marked with the observable macro. So in our case, our content model is marked with the observable macro, so we can use bindable. But let's say you have a model that's marked with the observable object that's using the observable object protocol. You have to use an observed object, property wrapper. All you need to know to keep it simple is that if your model is marked with the observable macro, you can't use bindable. I'll show you an example in this because what I want to do is actually pass the reviews for these books items to our review screen. So if I go into our review screen now, and let's say I want to access the reviews within the content actual model. So let's just add this in now. If I was to use the bindable macro like so, you'll see when I try and build a project, I get an error. And it's saying to me that I can't use bindable on the actual model review because it doesn't conform to the observable macro. So in this case, let's say if we wanted to actually listen to reviews within our actual model, we'd have to use binding because our content model will convert our reviews to a binding. In order for us to use bindable within this view, we can't use our review model. Instead, we actually have to use the content model that you built before that's using the observable macro. So if I was to change this from reviews to content model, you'll see that our build error here goes away. We still have an error because we've not used it in the other view, but it goes away in here. And in this course, in this playlist, I actually do have a video that goes into even more detail about bindable versus binding and when to use both. So to keep it simple, if your model isn't conforming to the observable macro, you can't use the bindable property wrapper. But because this content model is, we can, so we're all good. So what I want to do now is rather than us using this dummy data here that we've gotten within this screen, I want to use the actual reviews in our, content model. So we're going to need to write a bit of code here because I'm going to need to actually access the item at the index within this view so I can pass that in to here and then modify it and whatnot. Okay, cool. So what I've done here is I'm basically passing in the content model that will be passed in from our content view into this view. And I'm going to pass in the item that we want to modify the reviews or add reviews for. So that's all this simply doing. So the content model is simply in here so we can actually add and modify reviews. And the item is being used to get the index so we can access that item and make changes to it. Now, before we actually fix any of the errors in the screen, I just want to actually get this view to listen to the actual reviews within a book's content. So let's add that in now. So on our for each, rather than having this, range here, we want to use the actual reviews for a content item. And you'll see here that when we're trying to access this and use the, reviews for that content item, we're going to get an error. And the reason being is because our review isn't identifiable. So in our model, let's go to our review model here, and we'll simply just mark it as identifiable. And then we'll just give it an ID so it can be unique, like so. All right, cool. If I build this again, you'll see that this error now goes away, which is what we want. So we're going to get an error here and also in our content view because we're not actually, passing through anything through our initializer. So back in our content view, what I'm going to do now is actually update this screen to allow us to actually pass reviews to that review screen. Now we'll work through this together step by step, but the first thing we're going to need to do is actually capture the content that we want to pass into our review screen so we can access those reviews. So I'm going to create a new state property within this view here. So this is going to capture the content that we want to pass into our review. And the reason why we're capturing this is because when you're working with a sheet modifier, you're able to actually bind to some kind of property, which is going to be the state. Now, if you scroll down, you'll actually see as well in this screen that we have a button to show, reviews here within these actions. So rather than toggling our show reviews now, we don't want to toggle it no more. We want to use the sheet modifier that listens to an item being changed. So we're going to take this out and we're going to replace this with our content to review. And then this is going to have the item. And then we'll replace this as well with that also. Cool. So where we have our sheet that was listening to our show reviews, we're going to change this now. And instead of it listening to the toggle, true or false, it's going to listen to this state property changing. So we're going to just say sheet. And then we want to listen to the item where we can actually bind it to some kind of item. And then the on dismiss will help us, trigger an action when the view dismisses. Now, when the view dismisses for us, what we want to do is actually basically set the item back to nil. So I'm going to say here, content to review. And then on dismiss, we'll just say content to review is equal to nil, like so. And then here, this is where we now have our item, so our content item that we want to pass into the review. So I'm just going to say item in, like so, and then we'll say our reviews screen. And then the content model here is going to be content model, which is what we have declared in our content view. And then this item is going to be here, what we pass in, like so. Cool. So we should have an error here as well, and that's because it's expecting it in our SwiftUI previews. Now in here, I'm just going to put a dummy placeholder in here, and then I'm just going to say first, and then just false unwrap it because, YOLO. All right, cool. And then what we'll want to do now is in our content view, let's just actually just test this out and see what happens if we tap on our review. Like, does it actually get our reviews for us? So you see here, we've got free reviews. If I tap on that, you can see here that we have 3 showing up in the list here, like we expect. And we have 4, so we have 4. Now, the only thing we're not doing here is actually hooking up the data in our reviews to our reviews list. So let's just quickly do that. So back in our reviews list here, rather than having some dummy content, we're actually going to access the item and use the title and the description. So I'm just going to say here item.title, and then we'll say here item.comment. Yeah. And a small thing I want to do as well is just set the frame max width to be infinity, so they're all the same width. All right, cool. So that fixes that. All right. So now we just go back in here. So 3, we get our 3 reviews with our title and description. 4, we get all of our stuff here. So exactly what we want. All right, cool. Now, if you look at our UI here, you'll see that when we actually have a review, it's actually possible to edit it as well. So I can actually change, the actual content of a review. So what I want to do now is actually go a bit deeper, and I actually want to go another level deep this time using the bindable, new property wrapper. So within our reviews view, we're going to use the bindable property wrapper within our modify review view, so we can actually modify a single review. So we're going to copy a similar thing that we did before in our content view, where we capture the review that we want to change, and then we're going to need to pass down the indexes and the content model back down to our modify review here. So at the top here, we're going to add a new state property to capture a review like so. And then in our swipe action, rather than just toggling the show modify review, we're now going to just capture that review in that new state property we created. So we're going to say here, review, what I call it, property, review to modify. And then this is just going to be item like so. We actually do have this sheet here where we listen to the Boolean. Instead, what we want to do here is listen to our item changing. So let's just comment this out. And the reason why I'm commenting out is because I'm being a bit lazy. I'm going to copy and paste some things. We're going to say sheet. And then we're going to use again the item. And this is going to listen to the review to modify. And then when we dismiss this, we're going to set review to modify back to nil. And then in here, we're going to say review. Cool. Now within this content, what we're going to do is actually get the item at the index, get its indexes, and then pass that into our modify review view here. So I'm going to type this out and then we'll break it down because it will be quite a lot. So what we're doing here is, as you can see, is we're going to get the reviews index. So we're going to get the actual index of that review within the array of reviews in our model. And then with that index, we're going to pass that into our modify review view. We're going to pass in the item that we're trying to, modify. So that item is the book and the content models. So we can access the item at the index, the review at the index, and then we can modify it. So these properties don't exist right now within our modify reviews view. So we need to create that. So if we go into our modify reviews view, at the top here, we're going to add in those properties so we can change that review. So you can see here now that we've added in our bindable and the indexes for the item and the reviews that we want to edit. So we should get an error down below in our previews, which is what I expect. So we'll just update this now. And now we don't have any more errors. So what we want to do inside of this view here is that if someone wants to modify the review, you can see here that we've got these text fields here, and we've also got this text editor. Wondering, okay, how can I create some kind of binding between the title and the comment within our review model? And it's actually pretty nice this, because I can access the content and its items reviews and create a binding. So let's do that now. So you can see here now that with bindable, you're still able to convert your properties to a binding for UI and certain UI in SwiftUI, which is pretty nice. So let's just test this out. So I'm gonna go back into my content view, turn on our canvas, and then in this event in jungle, we'll tap on this, and we've got 5 reviews. Okay, cool. But I want to edit this one, so let's edit it. And you'll see that I actually get the text here because it's now bound to that model. So I can actually modify this. And if I do tails, you'll see that as I start typing, it starts to update. And I can even add in here, it was lit. Yeah, all right, it was lit. All right, cool. And then add review. And I've now forgot to add in the dismiss. So in our modify reviews, in our add review, what we want to do here now is actually call our dismiss action. So let's add in the dismiss. Got to add that in. So let's go back here and we'll just edit this again. I'm going to say masterpiece for sure. And we'll just say it was brazy. It was brazy and I loved it. And now if we hit add review, you'll see it dismisses and our model now changes. If I also close this and reopen it, you can now see that it's still holding on to that data that we're editing. So you can see here how you can use bindable between your child views and even your nested child views. And also as well, you can use bindable to create bindings to pieces of UI. So this is really nice. So I've showed you how to modify data, listen to data, how to read data and whatnot. But in our app as well, if you look at it, we actually do have a login, screen. And what I want to do is I want to add in some functionality where you can only leave a review or like an item if a user is actually logged in. So let's see how we can actually simulate, logging in within this app. Now, before, if you were to do this, you might be used to using the observable object and the environment object protocol property wrapper, but things have changed a bit now. And instead, what we want to use is just the environment property wrapper mixed in with our observable macro. So in order to see this in action, I'm first of all going to create a new Swift file called auth model. And the whole purpose of this file is to basically just manage whether someone is logged in or not. Now, I'm not going to interact with an actual API, but we're going to simulate it in code. So we'll first of all import observation, and we'll just create the skeleton for this model. So when someone wants to log in, we need to capture their email and their password. So I'm just going to write out some code for a object to hold that, and also a function to help us simulate us performing a login. All right, cool. So you can see here we've got this struct here called user that has a username and a password. And we also, as well, with our observable, model here, we have a user with some empty details and a flag to basically help us, set whether someone is logged in or not, depending on whether the username and password is empty or not. Now, obviously, if you was working with a real API, you'd have your API code here, but for the length of this video, we're just going to simulate it like this with a simple example. Now, we want to access this auth model within all of the screens within our app, so it makes sense for this to be at the root entry point of our application. So what we're going to need to do is in our app entry points, we're going to want to create an instance of this using the state property wrapper. So here, we're just going to say at state private var auth model. And then this will just be an instance of our auth model, as you can see here. Cool. Like I said before, we wanted this to be at the root so all of our screens can access this. Now, in order to do this, before what you will use is the environment object modifier, but things are a bit different now. Instead of using the environment object modifier, you just have to use the environment modifier. So if we just do at environment, you'll see that there's a modifier here that takes an observable, and this is going to be our auth model. Now, by us doing this, what we've now done essentially is any of the child views within our content view can access this auth model. Now, in our content view, what we want to do, so we want to basically block a user from being able to like, dislike, or modify a rating if they are not logged in. So in our content view, we're going to need to access this auth model. So at the top here, before what you would do is you would use the environment object property wrapper. Instead, all we need to do now is use the environment property wrapper to access that. So let's just say at environment, and then we can access this by declaring a type. So we'll just say auth model.self, and then we'll just say private var auth model, like so. Okay, cool. Now, something you'll see here is that our SwiftUI preview has crashed, and this is expected, and the reason being is because similar to when you're working with the environment object, if you don't inject your model into the environment in your SwiftUI preview, you get a crash. Now, there is a nicer way to handle this, because if you're using an actual application, this would also crash as well if you was running it on a real device. Now, a way around this is to mark your models in the environment as optional. Now, if you mark it as optional, what will happen is that it won't crash, but it won't work. So in order to actually get it to work this time, what we want to do is make sure in our SwiftUI preview, we always inject our environment. So if we scroll the way down here, we want to say .environment and then our auth model, like so. So a good habit to get into, in my opinion, is to mark your environment properties as optional and to always inject them as well, so that you don't get any crashes or weird behavior. So we'll tackle our likes and dislikes first. So all we want to do is just basically wrap this here in some code, our likes and dislike, where if you are logged in, you can leave a like, and if you're not, then we'll present our login view. So let's do that now. Nothing too wild. All we're saying here, like I said before, is that if you are logged in, we'll leave a like, or else we'll toggle the show login. So this will basically show the login screen. So let's just see what happens if we, test this out. So if I hit on this button here now, you'll see that we get that screen, and we have to log in. What we want to do now is actually just simulate our login, because right now this view doesn't do anything. So I want to just have it where it binds to our properties in our models, and then if you hit submit, it'll just log you in. So back in our login view, so we'll add in our auth model like so. And I'm not going to mark this one. I'm going to break the rule a little bit, and I'm not going to mark this one as optional, because when you're binding to, a text field, with properties, and it's optional, the model, it becomes a bit of a nightmare. So I'm just going to take the risk and not make it optional. And if we scroll down here, we're going to inject into our environment the auth model like so. Cool. Now what I want to do is I just want to bind this auth model to our text entry points here, so our text field secure field for the username and the password. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm just going to say auth model.user.username like so. Cool. And if I build this, you'll now see that I get an error, and this is expected because at this moment in time, at this recording, you're not able to actually bind environment objects in the observation framework to UI. I'm not too sure why, but there's a small workaround you can do, and that small workaround is by creating a bindable object within your view's body. So let's look into this now. So I say here at bindable var auth model, and then capture the auth model like so. You'll see that our error goes away. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to try and explain why this works. If you know, leave a comment in the comment down below. But I just saw this on a forum, whacked it in, and it seemed to be all right. So this seems to be the way around it for, the observation framework. So let's also do the same thing for our password. Cool. And you'll see this is all working exactly how we want it to. Now in our button, what we'll want to do is call our function to simulate the login, and also as well dismiss this view as well, so you can now go back and try and like the item. And I said before that I wanted us to basically block users from being able to edit a review unless they were logged in. So in our reviews view, we'll do a similar thing. So we'll just copy our auth model here, put that in our reviews view like so. And this time we'll make it optional because we're not trying to bind it to some kind of UI. And then if I just scroll down, we'll inject our auth manager into here. So we'll do our auth model like so. Cool. And then where we swipe to try and modify an item, we'll check to see if you're logged in. If you are logged in, then cool. If not, we just show the login screen. We'll create a new state property to help us show login like so. And then we'll just copy the logic we had before for checking if you are. So you can see here, the code is pretty similar to what we have in our content view. And all we need to do is just add in a sheet to help us show the login screen if you're not logged in. Let's just test this out. So we'll go to our content view. I'll try and leave a like, and I can't, so I need to log in. Now I'm not actually checking it against anything, so I can just put in any old nonsense in here. And now if I try to leave a like, we're now logged in, so you can see I can now modify. And if I go to reviews, I can now modify a review because I am logged in. So if we just simulate this again, where this time we'll try to leave a review without being logged in. Edit. And you see it's asking me to log in like so. All right, cool. Alright, cool, sweet. I want to show you and discuss the performance updates that we get now. So I know we have this login button, but what we want to do is that when someone logs in, we actually want this to change to log out. But in order to see that in action, we actually have to see how listening to certain properties only triggers certain parts of the UI. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's actually just put a breakpoint in on our for each here. And we'll run our app on the simulator this time. We've got this running on the simulator. And what I just want to do is just show you something. So let's say, for example, now, if I was to actually tap on this button, we're not logged in. Although our content model is being used in this view, when I tap on this button, you'll notice that it doesn't actually trigger our for each. Now, why is that? Well, the reason why is because the performance updates we get with the observation framework, our UI in our for each here is not actually bound or listening to the auth model at all. It is listening to the auth model within our closure, but our UI doesn't listen to the auth model here. So because it's not listening to it, it doesn't need to refresh. Now, if I was to log in, you'll see that again, I don't get a redraw, and that's because like I said before, it's not listening to any of the properties related to our auth model. But what about if I actually increase our, our dislikes or, likes? So if I tap on this button here, you'll now see that it triggers our for each. And the reason why is because our content model has changed. And because our content model has changed, that will cause a redraw. So something to keep in mind when you're working with the observation framework is that your UI will only refresh when when the properties it's listening to change, which in our case is our content model's data array, which our for each is listening to. So you can see here it's changing. Now, in order to see our auth model changing, our UI, what we need to do is actually listen and simulate a logout. So what I'll do is I'll actually change this text here to be logout whenever our auth model changes to be logged out. So back in our auth model, let's create a new function to log a user out. And all we're doing is just basically setting the user to empty and our flag to false for, is logged in. And then back in our content view where we have our login button, we're just going to tweak that a bit. So we just scroll down here to where our login button is. We're just going to change this. And now we have it where our button is directly listening to a property within our auth model. So if you're logged in, it will say log out, and then you can obviously, log in or out and whatnot. So let's just run this again and see what happens. So I'm going to put a breakpoint this time on the button, and you'll see when our app launches, it triggers the, for each because our data is being changed and listened to. Cool. I'll just disable that because I don't want to go through all the items. But this time, if I tap on this button here, you'll see that it doesn't actually trigger our button here because, again, this hasn't been modified. Nothing's changed. But if I was to log in, you'll see that the for each triggers. I'll just disable that. But now our button also triggers as well because we actually set logged in to true, and this view is listening to that is logged in property. So that causes a redraw. And now you'll see that our button changes to log out. So if I tap on log out, again, it triggers a redraw and the text changes to log in. I tap on this, you'll see that we now have to log in again. So you can see it's a massive performance improvement because if you was using the observable object protocol previously, you would have realized that even if you weren't using a property within your model, the entire view would refresh, which wasn't great for performance. But now our view only refreshes to properties that it actually listens to. Now, if you want to access the source code for this in the final project, you can actually get it in the link in the description box down below. But in the next video, we're actually going to look at how we can migrate an existing project from the observable object protocol to the new observable macro, and also as well when you want to leave things or when you want to change things. So let's have a look at how we can do that. So make sure you click on the video on this side here so we can actually get stuck into it. Let's get this money and let's go. Deuces.